Okay. Welcome to Sattva Project, Open Heart, Open Mind. Today we have a very special guest, Ayya Yeshe. I believe everybody already must know Ayya Yeshe, but I will do a brief introduction of our guest today. So, Ayya Yeshe was ordained as a nun in 2001. She discovered Buddhism while traveling in Nepal and India at the age of 17, on a search for the meaning of life. Coming back to Australia after a year of study and practice in monasteries, she helped run a Buddhist center in Sydney and trained with her teacher Khenpo Nawan Damcho for 5 years whilst working as well. So, upon ordaining as a nun at the age of 33, Venerable Yeshe, Venerable Yeshe, yes, uh, um, found, like the majority of Western monastics before her, that there was a little care of support for Western monastics, people preferring to assess Tibetan lamas who are already trained. Her main teachers are, she met the Indian Buddhists in 2005 and has been working with them ever since. Her teachers are His Holiness Sakya Tenzin, the second highest Lama in Tibetan Buddhism, and Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, that unfortunately already passed away. The Nobel Prize poet and peace activist. So this is a wonderful introduction. She's also the author of Everyday Enlightenment, published by HarperCollins, and is featured in the documentaries Life Beyond the Beginning Ball and Through the Eastern Gate. And she's also a Buddhist chanting. She made a Buddhist chanting CD that I deeply appreciate. That is Dakini with India Jiva, right?
Yes.
So welcome, very welcome, Ayya Yeshe. It's really a wonderful pleasure to have you here with us. I must confess, I really admire your work. So welcome to Sattva Projects.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you. So um, I have here some questions. Let's put this maybe as a friendly dialogue between both of us with an open, totally open mind and open heart to discuss and talk about this. Because it will be important for a few people that don't know your work to really understand the importance of your activism that I really admire. This is something I must emphasize because it's true. I don't see many people in Buddhism active like you and engaged. And this is something we in Sattva Project like to emphasize. And so it's really a big honor to have you as a guest today. Um, so please tell me a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, like why and when you decide to be a nun.
Um, So
Yeah.
my father died when I was 14, and that kind of made me freak out and realize I could die at any time and wonder what the meaning of life is. Um, so I left home at 15, became a hippie, started searching for the meaning of life, tried lots of different things. And at 17, I came to Nepal, where I discovered Tibetan Buddhism. And I spent a year studying the Dharma in Nepal and India. And so it was like falling in love. I really appreciated that the Dharma spoke of a sequential and clear path of how to overcome suffering. And it spoke, it didn't just speak about bliss, it spoke about transforming suffering. And the emphasis on compassion in Tibetan Buddhism was deeply appealing, as was all of the ornate symbolism and art. And, I'm a ex-Catholic, so
I know very well. I know very well what is to
right,
be
you understand.
a.
Yeah. So I became a nun at 23, and I helped a lama before that, Khenpo Noang Damcho.
Mm.
I helped him run his Dharma center for 5 years, and studied Dharma with him. I mean, I think I really didn't understand what I was getting into when I became a nun. Like, I just didn't know. I thought I'd just be like any other Tibetan monk, that I just didn't understand, that it's a feudal patriarchal hierarchy and they have refugee trauma and all kinds of things. But I just fell in love with the Dharma, really, and wanted to devote my life to that and wanted a meaningful life, and to get enlightened, basically. Mm.
Really, that was the reason that made you choose this path. But it's interesting because you have lived as both, as a lay person and as a nun,
Mm.
correct? So you
Yes.
as both. So what is the difference and the benefit for both paths, and why are both still relevant in your opinion?
Mm. So obviously, a lot of people these days think that we don't need monastics, that only lay practice is relevant
Mm.
to the problems of the world, and that's how most people live, and that's totally valid. And I think in the past, there was a bit of discrimination against lay people, this idea that you're more worldly or therefore can't progress.
Mm.
Um, but the Buddha, so there were, okay, so the previous Ananda once asked the Buddha, why did the Dharma of previous Buddhas disappear?
Mm.
And the Buddha said, because they didn't have the Dharma Vinaya, the code of ethics.
Yeah.
And sometimes Tibetan Buddhists think, oh, well, that's just for primitive practitioners, people who, we don't need rules because um, we have Dzogchen, we have the nature of mind, and therefore we can do anything.
Yeah.
But that's a real misunderstanding of the Dharma. You really need the foundation. Before you can put on the roof, you need the walls and the floor, which is ethics. Do no harm. First of all, do no harm. So, because the Buddha created the Dharma, the Vinaya, the Dharma Vinaya, the code of ethics, which is 5 precepts for lay people,
Mm-hmm.
and the Vinaya. So this is like the boat that has preserved the Dharma for thousands of years, actually. And the Buddha created the fourfold Sangha, which is lay women, lay men, monks and nuns. And there has been a beautiful symbiotic relationship in the Sangha for, millennium.
Yeah.
And that, we only have the texts we have now because there were people copying them, learning them by heart, and then copying them out. So monasteries weren't just elite places for people to study and practice and everybody else never got resources. Monasteries were a place where elderly people could come, like a community center, where orphans could go for food and to get an education.
Yeah.
They were a focus for community festivals.
Yeah.
And if somebody was down on their luck financially, they could go and volunteer at the monastery and be fed and, work in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And lay people would come and do retreat there. So monasteries were the center of keeping alive the Dharma, the focus of people's faith and inspiration. And rather than resenting someone for ordaining, like, oh, they get to practice and I don't,
Yeah.
people rejoiced in their virtue and, would share what they had. Because the whole point of life as a Buddhist is to get enlightened, right? So if you're keeping ethics and if you're studying Dharma full time and you have a chance to do long retreat and preserve the Dharma and teach the Dharma, that's a cause for rejoicing rather than a cause for resentment that they get to practice and I don't.
Absolutely.
Um, and yeah, so I think I actually had a really strong practice as a lay person. So I really think that it's obvious. We no longer need to debate this, that lay people can make a lot of progress. But this idea that we don't need monastics or that
Yeah.
monastics are out of date, it's like, well, actually, the Buddha was a monk, and ethics matter, as we can see from all this controversy
Yeah.
and abuse, that actually understanding the basic teachings and an ethical life and a contemplative life is really valuable, whether that's as a layperson or as a monastic. You know, we support each other.
Yeah,
So both
that's
of these lives are really important and valuable.
very good. Yes, you mentioned something, some point very interesting that I many times refer to many people when we talk about monasticism and the monasteries, as if they were like a deposit of children to learn how to write and read. And
Mm,
especially in Nepal and India, it's very
yeah.
typical to send the children to the monasteries to be a monks in this case, or to be ordained as a small monks, because
Mm,
they have possibilities to feed their kids, and then they send the children to the monastery like a school. This is
mm,
quite very complicated and delicate point that
yeah.
many people don't like to go into. So
Mm,
for mentioning that.
mm,
And many times I bring that up because it's important, because the function of a monastery is not properly to teach you how to write and read. So,
that's true. I mean, I
uh,
think these days it's a whole different kettle of fish because, you know, we have charities and we have schools.
yeah,
But I think we have to look at what the Buddha's original intention of starting the Fourfold Sangha was, which is to preserve the Dharma.
absolutely. So
Um,
that's
and
it.
and there were people that ordained for all the right reasons, you know, because they loved the Dharma, they wanted to become enlightened, they wanted to embody the Dharma.
Yeah,
And we have the stories of beautiful, like, you know, both lay and monastic people who got enlightened, you know. So we
yes.
should be remembering that, not so much like I'm, you know, the kind of social feudal system that developed in Tibet.
Yeah, that is, I used to say Tibetan Buddhism is not Tibetan culture.
Mm,
So I think we don't need to be Tibetans to practice Tibetan Buddhism. I tell that many times to some of my friends because they say, "Oh, you don't dress like a Tibetan." I don't need to practice
mm,
Tibetan Buddhism. You don't need to be Tibetan,
yeah,
or adopt Tibetan culture in a certain way, with all my respect to the culture and admiration, but we don't need to adopt that. Well, so when, please tell, you have a foundation that does a wonderful work in India, I must say. But we are going to have the website of this foundation here just right now under our screen. So everybody is invited to visit the website of this wonderful foundation that Ayya Yeshe had and found in India. So please, can you tell us when you decide it was important to create your foundation and why? What moved you inside to go to India?
um, I mean, I loved India, and I always felt like a sense of deja vu. I felt more at home there than I did in a Western country,
Mm,
because their emphasis on community, that sense of timelessness, and, you know, all of the Buddhist holy sites. It's such a powerful place, you know. But I was also aware of the intense poverty there.
yeah,
Um, I never intended to start a charity. It just arose out of a need of what I saw there, you know, in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha got enlightened. It's like, especially 20 years ago when I first went there, it was so bad. Like, people married at, you know,
yeah,
13, dead by 40, um, people begging on the side of the road, you know, just terrible poverty
yeah,
amidst the holiness. And there were two Bodh Gayas, you know, there was the barbed wire fence out the front of the temple, and inside is air conditioned, and there's beautiful marble and statues, and there's a security guard keeping the Indians out, you know. and and I just thought, like, which, if the Buddha was here, which of
yeah,
these Bodh Gayas would he be in?
yeah,
You know, and Indians gave us Buddhism, but they're, look at how they're living, you know.
yeah,
And I just
yeah,
thought, how could, you know, in the holiest place in Buddhism, what are Buddhists doing for Indians?
yeah,
um, and at that moment, I, you know, I just thought I should do something for Indians. And then a man appeared to me and just said, where can I find Buddhist teachings? An Indian guy, and he was from Nagpur.
oh,
So yeah. And he talked about Nagpur, where the Ambedkarites who converted to Buddhism in '56 to escape the Indian
Yep.
caste system that excluded them for
Yes.
thousands of years. So when I went to Nagpur, I found all these people, who just love monks and nuns, a bit unlike Australia. And I felt a real sense of community, and they needed help. No, they were motivated to help themselves because Dr. Ambedkar had stirred them up.
Yeah.
Um, a bit like Martin Luther King
Yeah.
Jr. and the civil rights movement in the 60s. That's kind of going on now in
Yes.
Nagpur.
Yes.
Um, People are still being gang raped. People are still being lynched. 75% of Indian marriages are still according to caste and
Yes.
arranged. So
I know.
there's still a long way to go. But
Yeah.
and then initially I just started by listening to people's problems and doing some pujas. They were just excited to meet a foreign monk. And one day somebody gave me a baby dying of diarrhea and said, please pray on this baby. And I just thought, this baby doesn't need a prayer. This baby needs action. This baby needs a $2 diarrhea pill that will save its life. In my country, $2 is nothing, but
Yes.
here it's a human life. And that's when I just started making posts on Facebook and looking for funding. And actually, Westerners are not that interested in supporting monasteries because they don't necessarily believe in enlightenment or can't measure it. It's not a material thing they can see, but I found they were pretty ready to give for more
Yes.
practical
Yeah.
things, more concrete things
Yes.
like saving a life. So that's how Bodhicitta Foundation was born. And gradually we bought, school uniforms for girls and did a bit more research and asked the local people what they wanted. And over time, we developed a girls' home and a women's job training center and four study centers in the slum. And we make 7,000 meals per year for undernourished kids and, Buddhist Sunday school, temporary nuns ordination, domestic violence counseling, and so on.
Wow.
Yeah,
Congratulations. This is really something amazing. And uh, to speak in a Buddhist language, that is the putting in action the Bodhisattva vows. So I deeply, deeply rejoice with your amazing work, honestly, from my heart. I wish many people that are listening to you feel inspired to help you and also inspired to begin to put in action because, as you said, when a baby has diarrhea in that context, that baby doesn't need a prayer, they need action. So, this is a very big point. Thank you so much
thank
for
you.
your words. Incredible.
Mm.
Well, I will not put too much emotion on this. Let's keep going. But it's really amazing. It's wonderful. I love to meet people like you that instead of reading Buddhism and reading sutras, they put in practice what they are studying. This is really amazing. Now let's go to a very interesting issue that is patriarchy. And I will like to ask you, what do you have to say about patriarchy in a certain sense? What do you think that could help, or what measures you believe could be adopted to have a more more balanced and equal system in Tibetan Buddhism? But especially, what do you think about patriarchy, about the system Tibetan Buddhism? I'm looking. I'm eagerly waiting for here.
Mm. Um, I mean, I've suffered a great deal because of um, ethnocentric Tibetan patriarchy. I ordained with 15 people, and only two of us are left because we have about an 80 to 90% disrobing rate in Tibetan Buddhism amongst Westerners. The temples don't support us. For the first
Yes.
time in 2,600 years, they literally charge us money to stay there, or they treat us as unpaid labor, not a source of refuge, not an asset to the community. They view us as a burden. No Lama talks about the value of Sangha, or they speak about the value of supporting their own ethnic Tibetans, but not Westerners. And
Mm,
actually, having fully trained teachers who speak your own language and know your own culture is really important for the Dharma to take root in the West and
yeah.
very important for the legacy. Like just a bunch of individuals practicing alone is not going to preserve the Dharma. We actually need living communities who have realization and who practice full time. We need, those lineage holders, but people are very short-sighted in how they use the Dharma as a therapy. Like, when I need it, I'll turn up, and when I don't need it, doesn't matter if the Sangha doesn't exist or monasteries don't exist, which is part of the problem we have of rampant individualism and lack of foresight in terms of how much have we received from the Dharma and how much do we give back to, build community, build solidarity, and preserve the Dharma for our children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so damaging, patriarchy. Actually, the biggest supporters and students of Buddhism are women, but women
Yeah.
are kept out of the Dharma. If you look at the Dalai Lama's retinue, there's one woman with 50 monks.
Yes.
If you look at the recent Indian government Buddhist leaders event, there's like
I,
all
I
men, all men.
yeah, I put a
And if you look at, like, it's just so sad, and if you look at the autobiographies of women trying to find stories of enlightened women, it's like, and in Tibetan Buddhism, there is one nunnery to 100 monasteries.
yes.
And there are 3 monasteries in the world that don't charge Western monastics, and 2 of them are headed by lamas accused of rape, Tibetan lamas. So we have a major problem with male leadership. It's destroying people, like, and the entitlement, the corruption is destroying people's faith in the Dharma.
Yeah.
It's really time it needs a massive overhaul, or otherwise it will just become like the Catholic Church, like irrelevant,
Yes.
and
And
they,
people may
yeah,
even do, many people I know in Europe that request to uh, take their names out of the baptism registers because they didn't want to be associated with Catholic Church by any means.
yeah, yeah,
Mm. But thank you for bringing this about the Western nuns, because
mm,
that moved me to start something I did in India, because I realized the Western nuns, when I've been there, didn't have any support, and I was shocked. And
mm,
that's when I met Jinsuma Tenzing Palmo, and I visit her nunnery, and
mm,
I talked with her, and I even did a small interview with her because I was so amazed with the conditions of her nunnery compared to other nunneries and she's a Western,
mm,
so and I realized that Western nuns really don't have any support. And I also realized that women in the West don't have any idea about this. So this is
yeah,
very important. You mentioned, so I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And also, you mentioned about male male leadership and this Buddhist summit in India, where you have the photo. For me, the main photo, it says everything, where you see His Holiness Dalai Lama and all the males and the big, what they call the big Lama, what I call a boy club, the boy club.
yeah,
So it's very sad to see everybody worship in Vajrayana goddess, and feminine is so important, but in practice in daily life, it doesn't matter at all.
mm,
So yeah, that's why I said it's very important to engage. And as you said, it's really, I think you are really you personify an example of, you do what you preach. So this is what we need, I think, people who do what they preach, and not only preach and doing teachings and empowerments and this and that, and then in the moment of truth, it's always the same. As you said, patriarchy can be highly destructive even, and
mm. And even to
but
men.
even to men, that is the main
Mm,
point. Also, even
yeah,
to men, but as you said, main followers of Tibetan Buddhists, they are female,
mm,
and they follow Tibetan lamas.
men.
um, yeah, they follow men, so they support their monasteries, they support their things, and you don't see many Tibetan teachers high level teachers talking about this kind of equanimity
Mm.
between, no, yeah. So it's
I
funny
mean,
how also don't realize this. They don't begin to adopt a certain change.
I think there's this kind of brainwashing that happens amongst Tibetan Buddhists because you look at all these, let's face it, boomer women who
Yeah.
usually highly educated, slightly affluent, people who empower Tibetan lamas and women,
Yes.
often women in Asia. And it's like this brainwashing thing that happens where we believe that only Tibetans are fully trained, only Tibetans can hold the Dharma, only they have the real thing, and we don't trust our own capacity, our own Buddha nature to embody and hold the Dharma. You know, I mean, I think what I've noticed in Tibetan Buddhism and Zen, when you have these Western abbots and abbesses alongside Asian Western abbots, Asian abbots and abbesses, um, like Thich Nhat Hanh has empowered Western
Yes.
abbots and abbesses. So I think there's this thing that happens with Tibetan Buddhism where we get brainwashed into believing we don't have potential. And I think it's really destructive. Of course, there is a lot to learn, and there's all the rituals, and
Of
there's
course.
there's a huge difficulty translating the elaborate, heavily culturally layered nature of Tibetan Buddhism and translating that into the West. But if it doesn't adapt, you know, so many, like, we need to question ourselves, why am I supporting a center that does not support me, that does not support women? What if
Yeah.
my sister or my daughter wanted
Yeah.
to ordain?
Yeah.
Where would they go? you know why am I just supporting men who don't support me? And it took me a decade of 15 years or more of Dharma practice, before I realized that.
Yeah.
you know
That's why I think it's very important to women to begin to question, especially Westerns that practice Vajrayana and that have different level of education that many women in Asia, even for cultural reasons. They must question them. I think they must question themselves and
yeah.
begin to realize you enter in many monasteries that are run by great lamas and high level lamas, and there is everything there. But then you go to some nunneries, and I will not even do any comment because you are the guest here. So I leave it to you because I'm sure you saw many nunneries in India. I don't need to, you could describe a little bit about that. So I think if many women had the opportunity to see by themselves what happens in India and Nepal in this kind of situation, maybe they will change their mind. Sometimes we need to see by, that's why Buddha said, you don't believe because I say, you go and see by
mm,
yourself, test by yourself. I think many people, as you said, use Dharma as a therapy when they
mm,
need, and they
mm,
don't go deep in practicing the Dharma, that is engage and go there, see by yourself. This is not pleasant. That's why you are in Dharma, because it's not pleasant to see. If it was pleasant, you were in the beach, right? Not properly practicing the Dharma, I guess. So I deeply appreciate your words on this. This is very, very important. So, and also the point you bring, patriarchy especially can be very damaged to male, but
mm,
they
yeah,
don't realize
yeah.
how damage this can bring to male.
And I think there's something that we need to learn from our Asian friends, and that is understanding that Dharma practice isn't just about the individual, it's about building community and noble friendship. As
Yeah,
much as it is about your own practice, your own peace, purifying your own mind, if you don't build Sangha, there
yeah,
is going to be no Dharma in future. So if you benefit from Dharma, think about how you can pass that on to future generations and create circumstances where people can gain realization and the Dharma will be preserved in a way that is accessible to women and men, you know.
that is very true.
Mm,
Thank you for highlighting this point.
mm,
Extremely important. Thank you so much. So I realized that your one of your teachers was Thich Nhat Hanh. He was very active in engaging Buddhism. He always implement and try to implement the concept of engaged Buddhism. So, what is engaged Buddhism in your perspective? Do you believe it's important for practitioners to engage more in causes and have a more dynamic approach in Buddhism?
I do, because happiness isn't just a personal matter, it's a communal one. And if you have an experience of the sacred, of the transcendent, you understand that you're deeply interconnected with all of life, and that all of life, the earth, your parents, everything comes from others.
Yeah,
And in Mahayana Buddhism, we say, as long as space remains, as long as there are those who suffer, may I too remain to remove the darkness of the world. It's not just words, it's meant to be that we serve each other, that we love each other, that we liberate and lift up each other. And when you say you love all sentient beings, then you must also understand their oppression.
yeah,
You can't love someone without understanding them, right? So if you're a man who says you love women, understand their oppression. If you're someone who loves people of color, understand their oppression. If you say you love all sentient beings, you've taken a bodhisattva vow, and there are 40,000 children dying every day because they don't have enough to eat, where is your bodhisattva vow at? And you say, well, I'm practicing to get enlightened. But how many lifetimes will that take? Why can't you do both
yeah,
in this life? Help people as well as do your practice.
yeah. Yeah, but many people think that is another misunderstanding. Many people think that help is just giving donation to the monastery and to the lama. They think
Mm,
that is the way they can help. That is not true. They can engage in things and do much more than just give donation to the lama or to the monastery or.
mm,
Uh, so, like for example, uh, Dana to foundations like yours and other kind of people that implement wonderful projects in the field and work directly with human beings. This is extremely important, and that save lives every day. So
yeah, yeah.
this is really very important issue, and I think many people don't realize. But please, uh, can you define, explain in a simple manner what is engaged Buddhism? So people demystify this thing, engaged Buddhism. What is this?
So, engaged Buddhism means Buddhism lived in the world. So, at the coal face of suffering, dealing with real world realities. So, applied Buddhism, basically. So, you can say compassion. What does that look like? But what does that look like when you apply it to a real life situation? When you realize there are starving children, are you just going to say mantras and blow on them, or are you going to give them food?
Yeah.
You know, um, because people can't think about Dharma when their stomach is empty.
Mm.
So someone has to have the basic standards for human existence and human rights and access to education before they can think about how to get enlightened. They have to have the conditions for basic human existence, you know.
Then we could talk about an interesting point. Maybe if you accept another interview, that is that is the question of the body. Many people in Buddhism like mind, 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 like the body
Mm,
doesn't matter. That is totally
yes.
wrong point of view. Without body, there is no enlightenment because there
And
is no veil.
also, yeah, and if you're sick, and not in good
You
health,
have obstacle to
it's harder.
practice. You are sick,
Yeah.
and if you are hungry, you cannot think properly. Your mind gets not clear. So, as you were saying, this is very, very, very important. Like engaged Buddhism is putting these things on perspective and bring them up and act on them, not just look at them and, oh, I want to be enlightened to help Mother Sentient Being, but people are starving at your door and you don't do nothing, right? You just sit and do sadhana.
See, everything we have comes from others. Like the fact that you can practice sadhana is because your parents gave you a precious human body. Your mother carried you in her womb for 9 long months, and your parents worked until their bones ached so you would be alive. And people fought so that you could get an education and not have to work in a factory as a child laborer. So the very fact that you can fall in love or have your own kids or study Dharma is because somebody has given you a precious human life. So, and then who is growing your food? Who is paving your roads? Who is keeping you warm in winter at their sewing machine in Bangladesh? Who is paying the price of the oil in your car? Who is picking the leaves in your tea? Who is growing your coffee? Like everything you have comes from others, and therefore our liberation must be bound up together. Yeah. So the idea that you're just practicing alone and that we're independent is a myth.
Yeah.
You know. Mm.
I'm quite speechless. That is very true. This is
Yeah.
very true, and I deeply appreciate you mentioned these points because this is really so true, and nobody wants to approach this. Everybody wants to live in the dream to go to the cave, and the
Mm.
cave is daily life, facing
Mm.
reality daily. This is also a cave, a certain
Mm.
form of retreat, and a certain form of big level of practice, interacting with others, have to bear these burdens, care all of this. And as you said, look, here we can bring another, again, patriarchic issues, because you said our mother care us in her womb for 9 months.
Mm.
So I think even that is a factor that in patriarchic people don't,
This is
they
true.
preach, they preach, oh, you should see everybody as your own mother, but I don't know how they treat their mother, or how they behave with the precious value they give to their mothers. So it's very easy to talk about mother, 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 but don't behave like a mother.
Mm. I mean,
So
I think Tibetans they do love their mothers a lot, but whether
yes,
they're treating other people like their students as a
like their
mother sentient being, no.
not only Tibetans, I think it's all over the world we have this problem, because it's very difficult to see the other same as you, uh,
Yes,
to see your son same as the other children,
yes,
right? It's
that's
always
very
the
hard.
and other
Mm.
kind of things. But I'm talking about this because in Tibetan Buddhism, this is kind of a mantra. You treat all beings have been our mothers.
Mm.
So if all beings have been our mothers, and we have deep respect for the mother figure, for the feminine, so please invite them to big conferences. No,
Yeah. How about equal leadership? How about you share your resources?
yes,
How about
that's the big.
you
Yeah,
create a cabinet and reserve some seats for women?
yeah.
You know,
So I think
how
this
about you
is
accept full ordination for women? How about you get real
yeah,
about, and not just meaningless gestures, How about you stop raping and beating and abusing us, you know?
yeah. That's the
Yeah.
point. That's very important. So, well,
Mm.
tell me something. Can you started as an Orthodox Buddhist in Tibetan Buddhism for 15 years, but now you are a social engaged feminist in the Mahayana forest tradition. What made you make this change?
Um, I mean, I basically realized I understood the meaning of the word glass ceiling
Mm,
because you can see everything that's going on the other side of the glass, but you're not allowed in the room. And
mm,
that's what it's like as a nun. Like the lamas will be at the table and you'll be serving them. Um, you're invisible, the lay people don't see you. Um, they don't see your needs. Um, and I think this idea of compassion and service is misused. Like being a woman is seen as bad karma and a crime, and therefore you have to expiate that crime by working for no money for the rest of your life and occupying a low status for the crime of being a woman. So I just realized to stay in that tradition
Yeah.
would be to in that system that would never let me in, no matter how much I studied, how many prostrations I did, how many lamas I served. I would always be right at the bottom. I would never be allowed in, a seat at the table. So to participate in that was to dehumanize myself, you know. And I'm not saying that service or, being humble is not a good thing, but I'm saying that the hierarchy is violent, and there is a violence in
Yeah.
it's very harmful, it makes people lose faith.
Yeah.
It's, in Asia, nuns in Thailand, mechis will knock on the gate of a monastery and they'll just ignore her and she has to walk away. It's stopping women from practicing. Patriarchy even kills women. And just look at how many women have to report abuse before it gets addressed. How many years the abuse with Sobia went on before it all came out.
Yeah.
So this patriarchy is, it kills women. It makes them commit suicide. It makes them hate themselves. I had a friend who was a nun I had one nun friend who was eating out of the garbage can at a retreat center in Europe to survive. I had another nun friend who'd been a nun about 17 years, and when she died of cancer and exhaustion after years of serving a Dharma center for no money, she said, "I'm praying to be reborn as a Tibetan man so I don't have to go through all this again." This is a Western woman. And there's so much we sweep under the rug, But anyway, I just went back to the early suttas and I found the way that Theravadins treat, although there is a problem with misogyny in Theravada too, there are a lot of progressive Theravadins like Bhante Sujato, Ajahn Brahms, Ayya Tatthaloka in California. There's lots of new monasteries popping up. There's now full ordination, although it's still not widely accepted. I just saw it was so much more egalitarian. And reading the early suttas, understanding the monastics aren't supposed to be unpaid laborers. They're supposed to be practitioners who are held in high esteem and who have the facilities to realize awakening, food, medicine, robes, and shelter. Without these things, a monastic life is not viable. So, not as a matter of resentment, but as a matter of joy, people in traditional Buddhism offer those things, but that knowledge has not been passed down. It just seems to me in Tibetan Buddhism that we're talking about these really high things, but we haven't embodied even the most fundamental things like refuge in the 5 precepts and kindness and
Yes.
ethics. There's just so much to,
Yeah.
So I just really appreciate those early teachings of Theravada and the reminder of what the Buddhist Sangha is supposed to look like. Because when I told people that I literally had nowhere to live in Theravada, they were like, "Come and live with us," and they were truly shocked. Whereas in Tibetan Buddhism, they were like, one Rinpoche that I'd served for many years, he said, "Pray to be reborn as a man." And Western Buddhists were like, "Well, you're not as poor as the beggars I saw in Nepal, so just get a job." But actually, the Vinaya prevents us from getting a job, and we're supposed to practice. What is the goal of, you don't ordain to be a nun to work at McDonald's. What's the point of being a nun if you can't actually be a nun? So, and just like, in terms of the abuse that we know, I just want to say there is so much that is good in Tibetan Buddhism.
Yes.
And that's why it just needs reform. There are a lot of good lamas. Not every lama is an abuser, obviously, but what we see, what we know of abuse, the stories we know, is just the tip of the iceberg. And what I know and what people are
Yes.
confessing to me and begging me to make public every day is so much more.
Yes.
Um, so it really, really needs reform. And that's why, and I just got tired of being associated with all of this abuse, and feeling
Understand.
helpless and shut out, like that's why. That's why I became, and I think to be honest, I just started to feel that maybe I love the Tibetan philosophy and I love the Bodhisattva ideal, but I just started to feel that maybe the whole guru paradigm is unhealthy.
Yes. We can say that maybe Lamahism is not helping.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the Lama should be an archetype and not a person,
Lama
because it,
concept is
yeah,
not
it
helping.
gives someone absolute power, and I don't
Yeah.
think it's very. I really feel like that power there needs to be a lot more accountability, and I'm not sure it's healthy. Yeah.
Mm. Now I will do a kind of not nice question, if you don't mind,
Mm,
related to
sure.
this point.
Mm.
Don't you think also Westerns have the need to put teachers in pedestals, to see teachers or gurus as gods, the kind of archetype of a father, where they project all their things, and if this father commit a mistake, then oh my God, it's a drama. They put them so high in a moment and put them down next moment. Don't you? It's just a question. Don't you think Westerns
Mm.
also have this maybe mistaken idea of what is a guru?
Yeah.
Uh, Not that he is a human being. He's a human being. He's representing the Buddha teachings, but he is a human being. That maybe you should not put him as a god.
But the sutras themselves describe him as the Buddha in person. So it's not that they're
Mm.
mistaken. It's just that they've missed the nuance
Ah, okay.
which is a Tibetan understands that the guru is an archetype.
Yeah.
Um, and the Westerner takes it literally and doesn't understand the cultural nuance. But
Yeah.
to, I mean, I think we feel this despair in the West that materialism has failed us, and
Mm.
you know, what have we got left? And we want to believe that something perfect and beautiful and wonderful and you know hope is there. So we exoticize, we reify this culture, these people who we can't understand. And part of why we love to support Tibetans and not our own Western teachers is because the Tibetans fit this ideal better. We can't understand the humanity, the imperfection of these people, because they're so called exotic. And then, of course, when we find out they are human, we are heartbroken and bitterly disappointed, as recently happened with the Dalai Lama. That thing was so taken out of context. What was going on, but I was just surprised to see people, kind of slamming him. Um, yeah, but I think the Tibetans themselves have played into this Orientalist fantasy and this exotic exoticism and this hope of Westerners that a perfect ideal culture existed, Shangri-La existed. Tibet wasn't a Shangri-La. Like, they had capital punishment, and someone who challenged the leadership ended up with their eyes pulled out. Like, it had good things, but as everywhere, there were some very disturbing things going on too.
But in nowadays, that happens very subtle inside the hierarchies. They don't take their eyes, but they do all the things. There are some. This still exists. This still exists. What you are describing still exists in a different manner, in a very subtle manner. Maybe I will say a
Mm.
21st century manner, but it exists. I know a few cases. I know a
The
few
West
cases.
is by no means a paradise, but maybe what we need to see is that we're all human, you know, and
Yeah,
and we need to be realistic about. I mean, Tibetans are traumatized refugees as well. They're human, and this fantasy of like these enlightened people and this wonderful rainbow filled country where nothing bad ever happened is just a myth. Like, I mean,
Totally.
look, Tibet was very special. There are a lot of realized yogis, and the Dharma was number one. It did have so many beautiful things, but it's also human.
It is. And many times things are not contextualized because people forget to say that Tibet was quite like a barbarian place, that um, Indian teacher was sent to teach the Dharma there. And
Mm,
this is very like people say, but they don't emphasize too much. We send Indian teachers to Tibet to spread the Dharma. We invite Guru Padmasambhava to come and stay there. Like, it was like a field of barbarians. And I think
mm,
I was very surprised when I first uh, hear and read about that. I was like, I had this pink romanticized idea of Vajrayana. And when I read about that deeply, I was like, wow, stunned.
mm,
And I felt
yeah,
this is quite interesting, like how Indian implement Buddhism and were the first to implement Buddhism, and then how Tibetan did this thing very subtly. And I'm not saying they did wrong; they did very well because I'm extremely grateful. And as you said, I think Tibetan Buddhism has wonderful things, and it's amazing. But if it can be extremely dangerous also if people don't do it in a proper context and learning properly. And in
mm,
nowadays, for example, Westerns also. I don't know if you can also give us your opinion on this. It was not in the questions, but in this conversation, it's developing. So, don't you think also Westerns want everything very fast?
yes. And they want
Like,
the highest, most exotic thing without getting. It's like we were saying before. You're trying to put the roof on the house, but there's no walls and floor. They
that
want Dzogchen, but they can't keep the five precepts.
and they want to practice tumo, tsalung, this and that, but they don't do prostrations. They don't want
Yeah.
to do prostrations. They don't want to practice nondro. They don't do the basic things. They take the refuge vows as just like saying, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's all. They
Mm,
don't analyze the deep meaning of taking refuge, but they want to go to Tsalung teachings and to
mm,
attend the empowerments of Vajrakilaya.
this
So
is
don't you
true.
think also Westerns want like, oh, I want to go to this level, but I don't want to climb the stairs. It's very hard.
This is true. Yeah, this is true.
So
But
you agree
I
with
mean,
that?
that doesn't mean that gurus aren't accountable because well, it's actually, the saying, not to examine the student it's like jumping off a cliff, and not to examine the teacher is like drinking poison, or maybe vice versa, but the example stands.
And
Um,
can you
but in
kind of,
that
yeah,
in that relationship, the guru has more power, and therefore, and knows all the teachings, and therefore should explain. I mean, we really need to examine texts like the 50 Verses of Guru Devotion, and we need to really examine like the early suttas and the foundational suttas, and really understand Buddhism as a whole before we go for more esoteric things.
that's the big point. So,
Mm.
for example, do you think, because I have this idea very clear after many
Oh,
years
sorry.
in Nepal, do you think, for example, do you think many people do really know what is an empowerment? Sorry for this.
Probably not. Probably not. I mean, I think they don't understand that it's a lifelong commitment, and it's like a spiritual marriage, that you're committing yourself to the teacher. Um,
So, like when you go to empowerments here and there, to this, there, do you think
mm,
Westerns analyze properly the teachers?
Probably not. But
So,
for example, these lamas that just do a drive-by ordination, do they examine the teacher? Do they examine the student and who they're ordaining and how they fit in with the community, and have they looked after their welfare as the Vinaya says they should? Probably not either.
yeah,
There's a culture gap.
both sides also must be analyzed and
Yeah,
discussed. Like
this
the
is true.
students don't analyze the teacher properly They don't
Mm.
even know what are the aspects to analyze properly the teacher, and the
Yeah.
teacher also not analyze the student. It's
Yes.
just so this creates a big confusion here.
And then add in cultural differences, and then add in um, sexual tantra, which is so confusing. It's like a big mess. I mean, Tenzin Palmo asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama who should be practicing sexual yoga, and he said, "I can't think of anyone." Right?
I remember very well that question, and also I remember that when they talk about crazy wisdom in that
Mm.
talk with the Western teachers, that
Yeah.
they about crazy wisdom teachers, and I remember His Holiness saying like, "Well, if you are able to drink pee and eat shit, then I believe you are able to do whatever." So that is crazy wisdom. So if you see that, you make your teacher do that. If he does, then you are 100% secure.
Mm.
So I mean, this, I think this is a brilliant answer. Like, you know, when you have peer procession, there is no p, there is no this, right? So when you have, but it's important to say crazy wisdom doesn't hurt. The genuine crazy wisdom doesn't hurt at all. So when these
But
people,
also the context, like the teacher has to behave in a way that preserves the faith of the students. And the first Buddhist precept is do no harm. If you can't even do that,
it's
like,
true, and I'm
where is
not,
your practice at,
yes, that is true, and I'm not properly talking about Chogyam Trungpa in this case. For example, I'm talking about Chato Rinpoche. That was
Mm.
a great, great teacher and great yogi, and he was seen as a manifestation of Doji Trollo, and he used some maybe methods that are associated with that style, but he never harmed. That
Yes.
is the big difference. I mean,
Yes.
his wisdom never harmed if it is
Mm.
done by, how can I say, a proper and realized guru, in
Mm.
my opinion. But in our days, I think Westerns are not ready for that kind of. They want, but I don't believe they're ready in certain points for this. But we are getting out of our context. I just would like to know your opinion, like if the student also analyze the teacher, and especially if Westerns analyze the teacher or they analyze the title.
This is true. Yeah, I
Because
don't think but I don't think it's also been explained that well, you know.
yes, so I think
Mm.
this is very important to bring up, and it's a topic that must be analyzed and discussed properly
Yeah.
so people can understand what are the points of a teacher and what
Mm.
are the points of a student, because both they are not analyzing each other.
Yeah.
So this may bring a lot of disturbance and misunderstanding, and that
Mm.
also takes a lot of people from the path because they
Mm.
totally lose their faith.
Yeah.
Not also students, but also teachers. They lose faith in the student because student goes here, receive this and that. Then, oh, it doesn't give me two more teachings. Then I go there, you know.
Mm.
Kind
Mm.
of. So it's quite weird. But anyway, um, can you please to finish this because it's a wonderful conversation, but almost 1 hour, and I don't want to take more of your precious time. Can you please give us some advice or suggestion to Western women that want to be, for example, a nun in the near future and follow a path like yours? What will you suggest to this young generation, to a woman that wanted to be a nun? She's Western. She want to engage in Buddhism. What will be your suggestion?
um, I mean, I made a monastery in Australia so that people don't have to go through what I did. Um, if you're a nun, you should study with a teacher for 5 years and live in community. Being a nun is a responsibility to Buddhism beyond your own practice because you represent the Dharma, so you should be properly educated and keep the precepts. And from what I can see in the modern world, the best way to train as a monastic and understand the Vinaya properly is to spend some time in Theravadan temples, with a reputable teacher, and then go on from there if you want to study in other traditions. Um, but also, don't just focus on one lama. Think of a sangha that you're going to join. And I think we all need to work to create more viable monastic communities and preserve the Dharma, because that is very difficult right now. There is not a lot of places to ordain. Like, people always say Tenzin Palmo, but Tenzin Palmo isn't really doing much for Western nuns, to be honest. She doesn't let them stay in her temple. She's helping. She's a great inspiration. Jetsuma is a great inspiration, but she supports Himalayan nuns. So Thubten Chodron has a really nice monastery, Shravasti Abbey in Washington State in the US. And there are a lot of really nice Theravadan Bhikshuni monasteries popping up, like Dharmadharini and Karuna Vihara and Mahapajapati, but we desperately need more. So my place is Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery in Tasmania. People can do temporary ordination as well, which is a good option just to try it out, and not because it's very culturally foreign, to understand what you're getting into. Because when you ordain, you become invisible. People just see the Dharma. So they project these massive expectations onto you, even though you're only human.
Yeah,
So
I
that
understand.
is, and it's like you stand out wherever you go. People will stare at you. You could become socially isolated. So there's a lot to cope with.
If it is a nun like you that is active, that speaks, that brings issues up, that debates, so how is it? It's not a stereotype. It's not a very ordinary stereotype. It's very, very uncommon indeed. It's not properly seen a nun having your kind of approach and role. I talk, I speak, I go, I do. This is not very typical in nuns, right?
This is true.
Because of culture.
Because of the straitjacket placed around us by men, I guess. But the original nuns, like Mahapajapati Gotami, the Buddhist stepmother, fought him
Mm.
and was like, they walked, hundreds of kilometers barefoot to prove they could hack it as nuns, and begged the Buddha, demanded, look, you've ordained all our husbands and sons. You need to let us participate as well. They asked for their rights.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I just think, why not? I guess I really tried to be that role, silent and smiling in the beginning, but I just watched everybody I ordained with disrobe, and I just thought, this is harming me, and this is harming the future viability of women's capacity to practice, both lay and ordained. I
Yeah.
mean, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to give a voice to that oppression, and to end that oppression. So we need to stop spiritually bypassing, and give a voice to our real experience. Um,
That is also a very important question. Maybe I think we are going to have a debate in Sattva about spiritual bypassing, and I would really love to invite you to do part of our panel to talk about spiritual bypassing, because in my humble opinion, that is one of the big problems. That is the spiritual bypassing question, and how people go very easily into that to uncover and pretend they don't have these issues, they don't have these problems to face, they this not exist. And yeah, so this is very
mm,
important, very, very important. You mentioned a few nuns, they're very interesting. There is also a Western nun I really like, that is Pema Chodron. I really like. She's and also I like Joan Halifax. I think she's also in the Zen tradition. She's, for me, she's quite nice. I think they do a certain kind of job. I really admire when Pema Chodron, when this thing with Sakya Mipan and all of that, she immediately get out. She took a position. She also was able to speak about it. I felt very surprised and very happy with her position in that time. So it was a pleasant surprise. And I have her in a good self esteem in my heart, because Yes, she was Shogyen Trungpa student, not easy. And she maintained many, many years. And I don't know. It's just, I could not forget her name because I have deep appreciation for also and her work, her writings, and her position because she took a position in a very difficult moment. She's not young, she's not properly young, so it's quite
Mm.
interesting. Anyway, thank you so much, Aya. I really hope you can be with us more than once. Your presence is really invaluable, and your work is, I don't have words to describe it, the greatness of your work and how you inspire um, people to put in action the Bodhisattva vows, not only recite and take the Bodhisattva vows, but every day put in action. That's awesome that you told us that you have a monastery in Australia where people also can, where women can also be ordained. This is really amazing. And especially you said something awesome. That is, you said, because I don't want people to go through what I have to go through. This is really a very rare quality because means you can put in yourself in other shoes. This is another thing in Buddhism that people preach, but they cannot put themselves in other shoes. So it was very subtle, but I could catch your words and pick them. Like, this is really bodhisattva heart, you know? I don't want nobody to go through this, so I will do this. It's not just blah, blah, blah. So this is amazing. People will have the chance to have your website here, all the information about your monastery, so they can uh, in a certain way, know your work and be helpful in many means. And also your wonderful voice in the CD, Dakini. That is a wonderful work. I hear many times. I like your Mashik Labrador shirt song a lot. So I hope many people will have the chance to see your website and be able to hear your wonderful voice and the CD, and especially consider that they are listening a wonderful voice and helping all mother sentient beings through your wonderful work. So I deeply appreciate your presence here and your time. Thank you for your generosity and giving your time to this talk. And I would like to humbly and kindly request you to do a dedication prayer before we finished, so all mother sentient beings, and especially women, can put a bit of attention in our talk today.
May we quickly realize all things to be no more substantial than the dream fabric of the night, and instantly awaken to perceive the pure wisdom display in the arising of every phenomena. May the precious mind of compassion not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
May it be so. Thank you so much, Aya. I hope
Thank
to
you.
see you very, very soon. And I don't have words to describe how wonderful it was to talk with you today. You
Thanks
really
for your
made my
time.
day. My day started, and you really made my day. Thank you so
Good.
much. Thank you
Take
from the
care.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.